Hey guys, it's Morgan. We have an amazing interview for you today, and it's only part one. I kid you not. It was such a crazy tale, so many different stories that just really paint a vivid picture of the horrors that have been orchestrated by the Chinese Communist Party that we had to break up the episode into multiple episodes. So this is part one with Jennifer Zhang. I'm going to read you her bio so that you have a good understanding of just how wonderful this woman is. And the fact that she took the time to talk with us is a really big deal. Okay, so thank you to Jennifer. This is her bio. It says, Jennifer Zhang fled China in 2001 for Australia. Her memoir, Witnessing History, offers a hair-raising first-person look at China's brutal concentration camps and should be compulsory reading for politicians and journalists as well as younger generations. Since the publication of her book and the release of Free China, Jennifer has been invited to dozens of cities and venues to speak about her experiences, including U.S. Congress, European Parliament, Swedish Parliament, University London, London School of Economics, Imperial College London, Society of Women Writers, NSW Incorporated, Australia, etc. Jennifer's stories were also covered by numerous media outlets around the world, including the New York Times, NBC, ABC, the Los Angeles Times, the Australians, Sydney Morning Herald, Channel 9 in Australia, The Age in Australia, Le Temps in Swiss, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Voice of America, Financial Reviews, South China Morning Post, Big Hollywood, Radio Free Asia, The Epic Times, New Tang Dynasty TV, Sound of Hope Radio, and more. Okay, so Jennifer was born in China in 1966. She went to university in 1991 and got a Master of Science in Geochemistry and worked in the Development Research Center of the State Council of the PRC, the People's Republic of China, until 1996 as a research fellow, and then worked as an investment consultant. She began to practice Falun Gong in 1997. After her release from Beijing Female Labor Re-Education Camp, she fled to Australia in September 2001 and was granted refugee status 22 months later. In January 2019, Jennifer obtained an EB-1 visa. It means Extraordinary Ability Green Card in the United States for her extraordinary abilities and her national and international acclaim. Jennifer currently lives in Greater New York and continues her effort to spread the truth via writing, reporting, creating YouTube videos, and blogging. This woman was a slave in forced labor camps in China, forced labor re-education camps, and she's going to tell us all about it. So let's get started. It's a pleasure to meet you. If you don't mind, we could just get started if that works for you.
Yes.
Okay, so we are recording. Now, all right. Now, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. Everybody listening is just fascinated by the stories of people who have been through trials and tribulations, and they came out on top thanks to the resilience that they had on the inside, especially. And your story inspires me so much personally as well. So if you don't mind, how about we just start out with a summary? Who are you and where'd you come from and what do you do?
Basically, my name is Jennifer Zhang. I come from China. I actually was born in the year when the Cultural Revolution started. So I grew up during the Cultural Revolution in China, and my family was persecuted very badly. And then after the Cultural Revolution ended, I went with my father to a relatively bigger town to have my high school education. Then I was admitted by the one of the top universities in China, which is Beijing University. So I studied 7 years and got a master's degree in geochemistry. And then I worked for the Development Research Center of the State Council. So that is the highest, you can say, government policy consultant and research body in China. And then after I gave birth to my daughter in 1992, my health was totally ruined because of a medical incident. I lost a lot of blood. I almost died. Then I lived, I stayed in the hospital for years. I couldn't work. I couldn't look after my daughter. And then several years later, I was introduced to an ancient mind-body spirit practice called Falun Gong or Falun Dafa by my family. So I took up this practice. I did it daily for almost a month, and then I found all my health problems were gone. And I feel like regain my life, and I was reborn with a new vitality, new energy. I went back to work. Everything worked so well, and everyone in my family was so happy. And then 2 years later, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, suddenly launched overwhelming persecution against Falun Gong. I think mainly because of its popularity. And since that, I was arrested 4 times and then put into a labor camp for 1 year. And after I was persecuted to death during that 1 year. So after that, I escaped in 2001 after I was released from the labor camp to Australia to seek asylum, and I was granted refugee status by Australian government, and I lived in Australia after that for 10 years. I wrote a book both in English and in Chinese about my experience back in China in the labor camp, which is called Witnessing History, One Woman's Fight for Freedom and Falun Gong. And after that, I mainly have been worked in the media industry since then, first in Chinese, language section. I worked for some overseas independent Chinese media. And then starting from last year, I think after the pandemic, because I saw the huge suffering, the world is suffering because of the cover-ups of the Chinese Communist Party. So I set up an English channel, like you are saying, Inconvenience Truths by Jennifer Zhang on YouTube, and started to do my own English language shows to tell the world about what is happening in China. I forgot to mention, and I came to the United States in 2011. So that basically was my story up to now.
Wow. And so what city are you in now in America?
Pardon?
Where in America are you located?
In New York.
Oh, very nice. I'm from upstate New York. I loved it very much.
Yes,
It's a beautiful state.
Vibrant.
If you don't mind, I'd love to start from the beginning. I mean, the Cultural Revolution, we see a lot of similar behavior going on right now in America, thanks to the American left. They're attacking American culture, heritage, history. Can you explain to our listeners what the Cultural Revolution was and the kind of impact it had on your family?
Yes, actually, I think my family was impacted when my father, who was graduated from a university, he studied politics and laws. And because Cultural Revolution, and I think first started to target many kind of different persons they regard as the enemy of the nation or of the Chinese Communist Party. So intellectuals, one of them. So my father, as an intellectual, was targeted. So he was, publicly condemned. He was actually dragged out from the hospital to be publicly humiliated. And my mother had to, I was only 1 year older than my mother told me. She had looked after my father, who was, publicly humiliated, beaten up, or that sort of thing. And he put me on her back, and she had to put up this handwritten self-criticism statement of my father, a whole lot of them, to put them in at the night and the designated places by the party to criticize yourself, why you are wrong, why you became the enemy of the party, that sort of thing. And then my father was relocated to a very small town called Hanwang, which had only 30,000 population, and my mother was separated from my father. So I was only 4 years old, and because my my sister was born, so my mother couldn't look after both of us because at that time everybody was paid very, very little, so we couldn't afford to hire somebody to help my mother. So I was sent to live with my father alone in that remote small town where my father was sent there to be re-educated, you can see, by the workers. So during my entire childhood, I couldn't even, play like with other kids, like any other normal kids, because my parents worried. As a child of a, family which is enemy of the party, if I started fighting with other kids, they could say it's my family's problem. My parents could get affected because they say, oh, this is the party's enemy fighting back at the party. So I remember in those lonely long summer nights when other children were playing, laughing outside, I shut myself in a mosquito net. We lived in a very isolated and deserted, the bank of the river. So there were so many mosquitoes. So I had to hide myself inside the mosquito net to read books. And because I couldn't go out play with other children. So the most of my childhood time was spent in loneliness. And most of the time I was reading all sorts of books I could find. So that's basically how my family was affected. And for many, many years, my father and mother couldn't live together. So I lived with my father, my sisters lived with my mother. So our family were not together. So that's the situation in Cultural Revolution.
Wow. Now, so your father, was he speaking out against the CCP, and what year was that taking place?
I actually, didn't know what he did exactly. And I think only because he was a graduate from a university, he had some knowledge. What amazed, I think you would be, my father already passed away in 2014, and in his entire life, when I was together with him, he never talked about any politics or any issues related to politics with me. So I actually didn't know what problem he had, why the party was angry with him. I only remember, when I was a child, sometimes, and like I said, many classical literatures, those foreign and Chinese, were burned as, poisonous grass classified by the CCP. So we could only read those little red books by Chairman Mao or whatever the party allowed us to read. So because I'm a really book lover, so sometimes my father wrote children's stories for me to read and put it like make it like into a book. And whenever my mother found his writing, she would burn them all, because anything you write down could become dangerous, could be something to be persecuted with, could be, we have thought crime, and you also have maybe writing crime, that sort of thing. So I remember every time when my mother burned my father's handwritten little stories, or sometimes I believe he also wrote maybe some essays or poems or whatever, my father's expression was so scary for me. As I could saw he was very angry, but he dared not to say anything because my mother was so worried that he would make some political mistake. So I felt so sad in the whole life. He never talked about any political issue with me. So I actually didn't know what he thought. about all these issues, all these things he encountered in life. As you know, in China, the Communist Party encouraged little children to report about whatever your parents are saying in the family to the party, to show your loyalty to the party. So it turned the family members into enemies against each other. That's why families don't talk to families about whatever dangerous issues. So
Wow.
I feel so sad that I just can't answer this question of yours. I remember the only time my father expressed something has a little bit relation to do with politics was when I was in high school. You know, in the last year we had to choose of our major, whether you want to study science or literature after you go to university. So when I was going to make this decision, my father said, "You study science." And asked him why. He said, "Whoever is the chairman or the president of the country, 1 + 1 is always 2. So you study science." So I understood he actually mean if I study literature, if I write about an essay or political comments or something, it is very dangerous in China. But if I study science, 1 + 1 is always 2, whenever who is the president. So he thought study science would be safe for me. But I think he would never have expected that I did become a master of science, but I ended up in jail as same, you know, for practicing some kind of meditation to improve myself. So you never know in a communist country what kind of danger you would encounter. You think you are not studying literature, I'm not writing essays, I'm not criticizing politics, but I still was persecuted very badly.
Yeah, that's a great lesson right there. And a lot of us in America see that too now of science, something that we used to all be able to mostly agree on, uh, other than I think pretty much environmental issues. We all used to agree on it, and now it's being weaponized against certain political groups. Now, I think your parents' story is a testament to their love. I mean, your father was sent to a new location to be re-educated away from where your mother was. And so they stayed married. How did they communicate? How did they keep their love going? And was it just their deep love for each other to try and get through this and have resilience? How did they fight back against the CCP together?
It was very hard. I actually did a series of TV shows, which you can find on my channel, Inconvenient Truths, by Jennifer Zhang. So the story of my father. They actually visited each other, you know, whenever they on the weekends or whenever they had a holiday or something. And my mother once did try to want to divorce my father because life was too hard for her as a family of somebody who had some kind of problem. I was maybe only 5 or 6 years at that stage. So my mother gave me a letter for me to hand over to my father after we arrived to my father's place. But as a little child, I was too excited. You know, I couldn't hide this secret on the halfway. So I gave that letter to my father. So my father, after he read that letter, he carried me on his back. He walked back to my mother's place and he lied on the bed. I still remember he always had carried that kind of scary expressions. You can say no expression on his face, but that kind of experiencing always frightened me. So I didn't know how they try to negotiate with each other. Anyway, my mother, I think, took back her words about want to divorce my father. But yes, we did have very, very difficult time. They tried to visit each other, and it was a long travel. We took a lot of efforts, you know, nobody had a car on those days, so we only rely on public transportation, which was very not reliable. We transferred our buses several times, and my mother was also relocated in a deep mountain, and she taught in the primary school in a deep mountain, so we had to walk in the mountain trail for hours till we reached her. So life was very, very difficult. But at that time, I think many Chinese people lived that way, and anything you need the approval of the government. I remember when I wrote my memoir, I wrote one sentence said, I moved to Mianyang with my father. And my editor, she's an Australian, she grew up in Australia. She said, she thought I made a mistake by word selection. So she changed my word father to parents. She took it for granted. If I moved from one city to another, I should move my parents instead of my father. So she said I made a mistake because I didn't understand as a Chinese the difference between parent and father. So I had to tell her all the story to make her understand how different the society of China is from what Australians normally understand. Family should live together, stick together. Even after the revolution was ended, and my father was, called back to the big city to work for the CCP again. My mother was allowed to join her, to go with him. So my sister and I went to the city with my father and my mother, and I have a youngest sister still. They were left behind, and they continued to live in that remote small town for many, many years until I was in a university. They were finally allowed to join my father in that relatively bigger city. So that was how hard life was. During that time, everything, need a permission. If you don't have a permission to move, you stay. That's how it was.
Wow. And so considering that was your childhood and you had your family ripped apart by the communist regime in China, the CCP, did you have animosity for the CCP growing up, or because of the education style there that was very indoctrinating, were you still in favor of the regime? What were your thoughts towards government as you came of age?
Yes, of course. When I was born, the CCP already took over the entire country. So all the textbook, all the literature, everything we received, all the information was about how great the party was. The great leader Chairman Mao saved us from the old evil society, and we are now enjoying a good life because of the party, because of Chairman Mao. So I remember very clearly when Chairman Mao died in 1976, I was only 10 years old, and in, I think, grade 4 of the primary school. I really cried with my classmates. We all cried so terribly because we were told that if without Chairman Mao, we would suffer, go back to the old bad evil days. Sometimes we watch movies of old bad evil days of how people were treated badly by the old evil, ruling classes of the evil old society. So we all cried so terribly. We thought the end of the world had arrived and we would all suffer old evil society again. So we really cried so hard. I even didn't cry that hard when my own father died, to be frank. So I believed in everything the party told me. So when I was in university, my father wrote to me and very excitedly told me he had joined the party finally because, during the Cultural Revolution, we talked about he was labeled as the bad person by the party. So after the Cultural Revolution ended, because the party need to, I think, lead his specialty in law era, because he became a top 10, I think, top 10 lawyers in his province, Sichuan province. So he applied to join the party, and he was accepted, and he became so excited. Finally, I think he thought after he became a party member, maybe he could gain better treatment or whatever, feel better about himself. So after I read his letter, I was so, because I always, as many, I think, daughters in the world, they all admire and worship their fathers, me too. So when I read his letter, I feel, oh, maybe this party is really great. It had, although maybe it had made some little mistakes during Cultural Revolution, but it had corrected itself. It had allowed my father to join the party. So I also actually applied to join the party when I was still in the university, and I became the first CCP members in my class when I was in the third year of the university. So at that time, I still believed everything, virtually everything the party told us, because we didn't have any other information, alternative information. So that's how brainwashed I was.
And so what does that mean to apply to join the party? Would you just become a member of the Chinese Communist Party? What does that come with?
Oh, of course you need to write up a written application and give it to the every university, every department have party branches. So you hand in your application to the party branch, and the party branch will start to observe you, to examine you, to test you, to maybe ask other people's opinions about you, to see if you are good enough to become a party member. When they see you are good enough, they will maybe first ask you to become a reserve, some kind of like a pre-member, not a formal member yet, for another year. So during that 1 year, you need to regularly write your thoughts report to the party to tell them how you think about this party policy, how you are going to fight, and ready to sacrifice everything of yours to the party. So you need to constantly write thoughts report to the party, and maybe the party secretary will seek to talk with you once for a while to learn what is in your mind, and they will ask us others, your fellow colleagues, your fellow classmates, about how you behave. And if they after 1 year of observation and in your pre-party some kind of exam or test year, so that is 1 year. If they think you are good enough to be a party member, they are allowed. And there's a ceremony where you need to raise your right face to a vow you will be loyal to the party for the rest of your life, and you are ready to die for the party for the rest of life, and you will never betray the party. So there is a religious, some kind of ceremony to go through, and then you are a party member. You are going to you need to attend the party meetings of the party members regularly, and you pay party due monthly or whatever. So if the party think you are good enough, maybe you can be promoted to become a party secretary of a certain branch, or this or that. You have maybe a lot of more opportunities to get ahead in the society. So that's how the procedure is.
Interesting. And so do you get accepted after the year?
Yes, I became a former Communist Party member.
Okay. And so how old were you at the time? You were in college?
Sorry,
How old were you?
how old? I think I was only not 18 yet when I entered the university, and when I graduated from 7 years after with a master's degree, I was 25. So when I joined the party, I was only 21 years old.
Wow. Okay, so at that age, you're joining the Communist Party of China. Did you have career goals? Did women at the time, were you able to have career goals as a woman in communist China at the time? What did that look like, and what were your visions for your future?
I think at that time, because Chairman Mao Zedong said something like women can hold up half the sky. Women are so liberated, living, having a good life in China. So on the surface, women are treated quite the same as male student. So when we had examinations, everybody get the same set of tests. If you score higher than boys, you go ahead of them. So on the surface, it seems that women are treated like the same kind of degree, but actually under, I think that's on the surface. But when you see the actual picture, most of the most powerful persons in the positions are still male figures. And after, I think, the so-called one-child policy, many baby girls were killed, and many women, actually young girls, became prostitutes after the so-called opening up and reform to the outside world. So there were maybe tens of millions of prostitutes in China now. So you can't really say that women's status had improved a lot.
So I have a few questions on this. So, what happened to lead to this massive influx of prostitution? When did that happen and why?
I think because that happened, I think, during maybe starting from the so-called opening up and the reform to the outside world. And everybody and people, the then CCP leader Deng Xiaoping encouraged people to become rich. I think this is a very deep issue. When the CCP took power in 1949, they told Chinese people that they would lead Chinese people into communism, and everybody would have an equal amount of happiness, and everybody would enter the heaven of communism. So they actually confiscated all private property. They took over the land from landlords and the businesses of business owners, factories in the city. So they took people's all private properties, and they said they distribute them equally to everybody. So now everybody in China collectively owns everything. So in the countryside, people started to the so-called people's commune. So everybody eat together, work together, and you are not allowed to even to cook at your home. That kind of system or social system actually didn't work out, and it had never worked out. So soon after, millions, tens of millions, I think somewhere at least 35 or 45 even millions people were starved to death at the end of 1950s and 1960s. And then it's 10 years of Cultural Revolution. So after the Cultural Revolution ended, I think virtually nobody in China actually still believe we can enter into communism tomorrow. So the CCP was desperate to find a new excuse for themselves to stay in power. So the new motto or the new slogan for them now is, now we allow a part of the people in the society to become rich first. So economic achievement become, the new, you can say, excuse or legitimacy, or the base of legitimacy for the CCP. And then because it encouraged everybody to become rich, for some women who lived in the countryside, who didn't have good education, and who didn't have connections in the city or with any party members or any people who had power, if they want to become rich quickly, maybe become a prostitute. Prostitute is a very quick way, easy way for them to make quick money. And on the surface, prostitution is illegal, still is illegal in China now. But there are so many this kind of places where people can go, and as these young girls can make money. I actually met a lot of such kind of women, girls, when I was in the labor camp, in the detention center. They were arrested. If they were found, they were caught, they got arrested, but still there were so many people doing that. The local police, if they arrest them, they ask for bribery money, they ask for money, and if you pay money, maybe the police won't arrest you. If you don't pay money, they arrest you. So everybody makes money through this industry. That's why in the book of the law, it is illegal to practice sex industry in China. But the reality is there are tens of millions of such kind of women in China, because the Communist Party really encouraged people to run after money, and it's become a glorious matter if you can make money no matter what kind of method you use to become rich. So everybody wants to become rich and make quick money. I think that's deeply, they really want you to run after money and to run after material pursuit, so that nobody would question its legitimacy. You won't think about freedom of belief, freedom of speech, or freedom of whatever. So they give you the freedom to make quick money if you don't question the party's legitimacy. So that's a deep reason behind all of this.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Now you mentioned the one child policy. Can you explain what that was? And did you have any personal experience with that, or any stories?
Yes, very bad one. I think somehow the CCP started to believe, because we had too many people in this country, that's why everybody is living in such terrible conditions. So they think we need to start control population. So I think it's starting from the end of 1970s, they started to implement this one-child policy. So every family was allowed to have only one child. If you have more than one child, you will be punished. Actually, you can't get more than one child, because they'll need to have a permission or a passport or whatever code to give birth to a child. If you don't have that code, then you can't even go to the hospital. So and if you live in the city, you will lose your job. If you live in the countryside, the party member in the village will go to your house and take you to the hospital to do forced abortion. So sometimes, even if after I personally heard a story from my aunt who worked in a hospital. Actually, in her hospital, one baby boy was already born, because he wasn't the first child, he was the second child. He wasn't supposed to be born. So the nurse in the hospital actually carried this little baby with a tray and threw him they have a special dump, pit for this illegal children. So they killed that little baby in that hospital. That's the story I heard from my own aunt. So every family was allowed only one child, because in China, Chinese tradition, when women marry a man, the child will inherit the family name. So every family, if you want to carry on your family name, you need to have a son in your family. If you don't have a son, your family line was broken here. So many people, if they were trying to find out whether they are having a baby girl or boy, boy baby or girl baby, when they were still pregnant, if they found out somehow, it was a girl, they were did abortion, and then that little baby girl was killed either before or some even after they were born. So during that process, I think at least it was an estimation, 300 million babies were killed because of this one-child policy. And now you know what, after more than 30 years of this one-child policy, there were 6 imbalance between boys or males and females in China now. I heard it's also some 20 or 30 million more male people than female. So now they are having big problem for this male youth to find a wife because of the sex imbalance. And now they suddenly found they are experiencing a huge drop in birth rate. And now they started to allow you to have a second or third child. They even encourage you to have a third child. So it's all happened because the CCPs always believed they had the power to decide everything and anything. And so I think the arrogance of the power made them did all sorts of stupid things against the nature. The sex of the population was naturally balanced. If you allow people to have their own decision or their own free will to decide when and how many children they have, the nature or the hand of God is balancing everything. But now they think they are better than God. They want to intervene with every part of your life. I remember when I lived in Beijing, I was once visited by local, they have resident committee members visiting me in my family and asked me what kind of method you are using to prevent yourself from becoming pregnant again, because I already had a daughter now. So I feel so insulted. You are asking me my bedroom questions, what kind of method I was using. So they don't have respect to privacy, to human rights, and all. They think everything, including women's vagina and womb, belongs to the party. They control what you have, what you don't have. And I myself actually was also forced to do abortion after, because I've already had my daughter. After that, I got pregnant again, but because of this one-child policy, I had to do abortion. And because my health was already very, very bad, so because of this abortion, I suffered a second huge blow. That's why my health was so bad. That's why I had to lie in the hospital for years. So I felt so bad. And every time I think about I had to do this, because I lived in China then. I had no choice.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about that. So how did you get to a point of, you have your daughter, you have to say goodbye to the second baby, you're in the hospital. How did you end up getting thrown into political prison by the Chinese Communist Party?
Yes, like I said in my brief introduction, after lying in the hospital for years, I was posted a set of books, of Falun Gong books by my sister and mother in Sichuan province. They practiced that for almost a month then, and they felt it was so good. So they were so excited. So they posted me a set of Falun Gong books. When I read those books, I was also very excited because, you know, since I was in university, I somehow always believed there must be a final truth in the universe. Otherwise, the universe could not maintain its harmony and stability. So I always wanted to find out what that ultimate truth was. I read a lot of philosophy books and religious books and even books of change, you know, in ancient China to try to find out. I did a lot of Qigong practices to try to find out from, you know, human life or science aspect. So when I read the 4 Falun Gong books in one go, I think within 2 weeks, I read those 4 books twice. I was so excited and I finally felt the book attracted me so much and they answered all my questions towards human life, towards society, towards the universe. So I immediately decided I would also practice Falun Gong. So I immediately went to the park. I found a practice site. I started practicing with everybody in the park. So like I said, within only 1 month, I totally recovered. My all health problems were gone and I went back to work like a newborn person. So because this practice was so good, its health benefit was so obvious. Actually, many people who had a far worse health problem or even critical conditions, they all got recovered. So because this practice is simple, it's easy to do, and it didn't charge people any money. Anybody can learn for free of charge. So it spread in China very, very quickly through mouth and word of mouth. People eagerly introduce it to their families, friends after they experience the benefits themselves. So within 7 years, this practice was only introduced to the public in 1992. That was the year when I gave birth to my daughter. So within 7 years, in 1999, the Chinese government did a survey and they found that there were about 70 to 100 million people in China doing the same thing. And that number at that time was more than the party members. You know, in China, it was a one-party country, and the biggest fear of the party, like I said, it's its own legitimacy. So many people are doing something together, so they were so frightened if somebody inside this group stood up and say, oh, let's get rid of this CCP. And because this group had so many followers, they could become, you know, an alternative choice for the people. So I think because of their own fear for its own legitimacy, the then CCP leader Jiang Zemin decided to crack down on this practice. That's how I, as a Falun Gong practitioner, ended up in prison, arrested, like I said, 4 times, and then sent to a labor camp to be.
So what did that look like? Was it the local CCP member? They came to your house one day and said, we're taking you away?
Oh, it happened, yes. Like I said, 4 times. The first time I was actually stopped by a police on the street, and he asked me, are you a Falun Gong practitioner? I said, yes, because that was the first day when they started officially. Actually, they hadn't not started officially announced the persecution yet. That was on July 20th, 1999, I heard from a fellow practitioner that the Communist Party could start to persecute Falun Gong. And I said, oh, maybe, several months in April, we nearly 1,000 or 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners went to the government compound called Zhongnanhai in Beijing to appeal against, the persecution, not persecution yet. In April, they arrested 45 Falun Gong practitioners in Tianjin. Because they went to a publication saying that magazine published an article saying something very bad things about Falun Gong, which are not true. They made, so they went there to appeal. They say, oh, please, this practice is good. What you said is wrong. Could you please correct that article because you tarnish our name. So in April, we went there to appeal, and they released these 45 arrested Falun Gong practitioners. So in July, when I heard they started arresting Falun Gong practitioners in 18 different provinces, I thought I want to go there again to appeal. But even before I was, I reached my destiny, they already had police waiting for us on the street and stopped me and asked me whether you are a Falun Gong practitioner. I said yes. And they immediately I was took onto the bus. They have buses of Falun Gong practitioners. When one bus was full, we were taken to a sports center in the suburb. So thousands of Falun Gong practitioners were arrested that day. So that was my first arrest. The second arrest, let me think, happened after I attended a private, meeting in a Falun Gong practitioner's home. After the CCP officially announced the persecution of Falun Gong, as fellow Falun Gong practitioners, we of course want to meet with each other to discuss what should we do under this kind of circumstances. So I was arrested for attending to visiting a fellow Falun Gong practitioner in her home. And I think the last time I was actually, like you said, arrested when I was asleep at my home. They actually the internet police intercepted an email from the internet when that email was sent out. The content of that email was a letter I wrote to my parents-in-law to explain to them why I still wanted to practice Falun Gong despite the government persecution. So I don't know whether because of they have keywords, function or filter or whatever. So anyway, they intercept that email, and because of that email, I was given a 1-year labor camp, sentence, a decision by the CCP. So I didn't do anything violent. I was sleeping at home, and they broke the law by intercept the email, and then I was sent to a labor camp. So that could happen.
Wow. Okay.
Actually, in the detention center, the police very frankly told me. I asked him why was I arrested while asleep at home. He said, because of your thought. So that's not a joke. That's his exactly words, because of your thoughts. So I was sentenced to 1 year in labor camp because of my thought.
Wow. Now, so when we hear about these labor camps, what they say is that people will be re-educated and come out with a new mindset after working hard and going through the labor of these camps. Can you tell us what it was like to actually go through a CCP, a communist Chinese labor camp?
The labor camp, actually, I'm doing a oral history video series now in Chinese language. So I just finished the part of the first day when I was sent to the camp. So the first sound we heard is squat. So on the first day in the labor camp, we were forced to squat like this with our hand, holding our heads lowered down, looking at our feet, and motionlessly squat like this under the baking sun for 15 hours straight.
15 hours?
They couldn't endure it. They fainted away. They immediately apply electric batons on us to wake us up, and so that we can continue to squat under the sun for endless hours. I couldn't imagine how I managed to endure that for so long. And from the second day on, every day for 16 hours from 6:30 in the morning till I think 10:30 in the evening, 16 hours per day. We have to stand in front of our cell, and also like with our heads lowered, looking at our feet, our hands holding like this, and at the same time recite out loudly the very insulting regulations of the labor camp. And in the labor camp, we were never allowed to raise our head, even if when the police officer spoke to us, we had to look at our feet and answer like this. And when before we were given food or a meal, we need to kneel down and raise our bowl and say, oh, please give me some food, some kind of that sort of thing. So there were three parts of our labor camp, you can say career. The first is endless torture. On the, I think second or third day, I was shocked by 2 electric batons on my leg, all over my body, until I lost my consciousness. So the first part is endless torture. They said very frankly, the only purpose for us to be sent to the camp is to get us reformed. Reformed means we need to give up our belief in Falun Gong. We need to think from the bottom of our heart that Falun Gong is evil, Falun Gong is an evil cult, Falun Gong is banned, and the Communist Party saved us from this evil cult. So endless torture. And of course, the second part is waiting to be chosen as an organ donor. So they gave us a blood test, physical checkups repeatedly, and store the data of our blood type, tissue type, whatever, medical information there. So if anyone in the US or in Australia or anywhere, any place in the world, then if anyone needs an organ, they search inside that database, they find a match and they kill that person on demand so that his or her organs can be transplanted to this person if you can pay big enough money. That's why in the entire world, you need to wait for years for an organ. But if you go to China, they openly promise you they can find a match for you within days. Sometimes they did urgent organ transplant within 24 hours. So only by store a large number of people's data in that database and they do reverse match. Here, the normal match is, you wait for an organ. But in China is, they find an organ in a big, large data bank of living person and killed that living person to match you. So that's reverse match. So that's the second part of our labor camp career. The third part is, of course, why it is called labor camp, because they believe if they give me hard enough labor to do, we would be changed into a good person. So hard slave labor every day. So after we were transferred to the labor camp, I think that on the 38th day after we were sent to the camp, every day we got up at 5:30 in the morning and work until midnight. Sometimes we weren't given sleep at all so that our products could catch up the plane to Western countries. The police never bothered to hide the fact that all the products we made in the labor camp were exported to a Western country. That's why we must make sure the quality is good enough, because they are exported products. They earned dollars for our great love motherland, China. So slave labor. So at some stage, people ask me, do you miss your family in the labor camp? I said, honest, no, because every time virtually there were only two things on my mind. One is, how could I hold up for another day without being transformed or reformed? Another one is, how could I reach my quota today? Because every day you are given a quota, and if you couldn't reach your quota, you can't go to sleep. So after I use the bathroom or restroom, I dared not even to wash my hand, because hand washing needs time. And I dared not to waste that 1 minute on hand washing. I must use all my time. Most of the time we were hand knitting sweaters. So even on our way from our dorm to the dining hall, on the way, we are still knitting while we're walking. That's how hard the work was.
And this is for some American companies?
Yes, I think many companies from all over the world, but of course, most of the time they did not tell you which companies. Actually the labor camp, of course, they didn't get direct order from any Western companies. They get an order from a Chinese company, but that Chinese company may get an order from a foreign company. So somehow I found out that when I was there, that was in February 2000, the labor camp received an order from Nestle, the Swiss company Nestle, which make good coffee.
Mm-hmm.
But we were given an order of 100,000 piece of rabbits, handmade rabbits, for them to give out as a gift. If you buy enough amount of their coffee, you get a little piece of rabbit this high. So it needs at least more than 10 hours and 30 procedures to do that little rabbit with hand. And I think the labor camp only get maybe some 4 cents of Australian dollars for one piece. And we got nothing. So that's why you got so many cheap made in China products. They may probably come from a labor camp who were made with blood and tears by innocent people like me. How can American companies compete with this kind of low-cost labor, cheap labor, slave labor? So every day in the labor camp, almost every day, we were forced to do this kind of all sorts of hard slave labor. So that's our labor camp personnel. And there were so many times I thought I would collapse. I would be driven into insanity. And I did witness other people who were driven into insanity because they couldn't handle the pressure. And because the police were given a quota to achieve, they have to, when I was there, their quota is they had to reform 95% of Falun Gong practitioners. If they couldn't achieve their quota, they would even either lose their job or punished or not paid or demoted. So they encouraged the other real criminals in the labor camp to torture us as hard, as badly as they could. And if those criminals can torture us so bad and can make us sign that statement to say we will give up Falun Gong, they will be released ahead of time. And if they beat us to death, they will not be held accountable for what they do, because if they can't achieve their quota, we are useless people to them. So it's not a problem to beat us to death. So that's the labor camp reality in China. It was, I think, on the first day when I was there, I felt so like unreal. I feel, is this still the 21st century? Is this happening? And that labor camp is only about 20 some kilometers away from the Tiananmen Square, the so-called the heart of New China, and where the Beijing Olympic would going to be held years before. I couldn't believe it. I thought I only read this kind of thing in history book in the Nazi concentration camp. How could all this is still happening and right around me? I just couldn't believe it, but that was,
Wow.
I think, worse than the Nazi concentration camp, because I think the Nazis did not try to reform those Jews. We were not only tortured physically, but our minds, our will were, I think, raped by this kind of reform. They force us to curse our own belief and to do all things against our will, our nature, and to transform really a human being into a non-human being without thoughts, without will. You are not allowed to have any kind of your own free thinking. You have to think from the bottom of your heart that the CCP is great, the torture is great, because you are evil cult member, so it is good to torture you. You have to believe in what they say, and you need to help them to torture your fellow Falun Gong practitioners if you want to be released. That's how hard the situation was in the labor camp. That's why so many people were driven into insanity. I think any normal human being couldn't really handle that kind of mental, physical pressure, and everything was pushed into extreme amount of, I never seen anything so evil in this human history or in this human world.
Wow. I thank you for telling us that. I would love, I can't believe we've already gotten into an hour, but I'm shocked by it, but there's still so much to talk about. What do you think about coming on for a second episode? And we'll leave this as a cliffhanger and bring you back for the second half of your story. Cause I know you're a very busy woman, but I think a lot of people will benefit from hearing about the mental fortitude that it took to get through this problem. And not only that, but then to come out on top the way you are now. I'm just so thankful that you would take the time to share your story, and would that be okay? Would you want to come on for another one?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. And what we'll do for now, so everybody listening, we're going to, in the description, link to everything that you need to get more connected with Jennifer and hear more about her story, listen to the work that she's done, read the work that she's written, and just learn so much. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next time.